Ray Bathurst, have you two solved the case?
I'm more confused than I was when I first got here. I want to thank John for having me participate in this. I have found this to be a very, very fascinating undertaking. I too want a lot more than just a cold beer from you for having to struggle through treachery, but I do thank you. And I think Dave Charney took a piece of my comments when he talked about Brian Kelly. This is a wonderful exercise, and it really is, and it should be something that we go back and take a really hard look at. These case studies are important. They're not abstract historical issues. They're very relevant for men and women my age, but more importantly for students who are going to be going into the community. Case in point, I can remember back in the, not me personally, but my colleagues talking about the early 60s when the FBI was looking for a mole inside the FBI, and it tore the FBI up looking for the famous unsub Dick, supposedly someone who was a surveillance person, an FBI agent who was a surveillance person, and tore the FBI up. We all remember Angleton and Honatol, for example, and what that did to the agency. And just like David pointed out, the search for the mole, and we're looking for someone, and all the facts, every single fact pointed to Brian Kelly, and it destroyed Brian Kelly. I mean, he was a wonderful human being. You recovered, but you never really recover from that. All the facts pointed to Brian Kelly, but it was Robert Hansen. So we have to be very, very cautious about this. And I just have a couple of comments, and where I would like to see, I'm looking at it from a counterintelligence standpoint, looking at it from an American counterintelligence standpoint, and going back and taking a historical scrub on this thing. I think where I would start personally is right in the very beginning. Go back and take a look at the debriefing of Guzenko. First of all, who did the debriefing of Guzenko? Number one. I would like to know, I don't, maybe we do know this, but I'd like to know who did it. Was it somebody who was assigned to do it, or was it somebody who really had the experience to do it? Number two, was it somebody from MI6? Because remember, British Security Coordination was really running that show for the British at that particular time, or was it somebody from MI5? Did they record the comments? Was it a Russian speaker who actually interviewed him? And this is very, very critical. I can tell you this from my own personal experience. When Yurchenko came out, I was the supervisor, wonderful experience in my life, but I was the supervisor of the, what was called the Pazarine investigation. One of my dear colleagues is in the audience tonight. Hank Flynn was a member of that team. We worked with NSA. And Yurchenko gave us a description of this thing. Vitaly Yurchenko comes out and he gives us a description of this individual, and he tells us that the individual came, and later on we determined that he had a big brown Mercedes, and the Bureau was putting all sorts of pressure on us to look for a big brown Mercedes. We worked for weeks looking for a big brown Mercedes, and we insisted. We put the pressure on CIA, we put the pressure on the Bureau to have one of our agents, in this case Butch Hodgson and David Faulkner, who are our case agents, go and talk to him, go back over this. And he sat down and said, we're looking for a brown Mercedes. He said, well, I didn't really mean a brown Mercedes. Yeah, what did you mean? Well, cut to the chase. It was a green Chevy Nova. So I use that as an illustration of what we're talking about here. It's very, very important. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on the Hollis case, but I look at what Guzenko gave, and the piece I took out of the secondary source, in this case, in this case, KGB, the Gordievsky book, and he said that Guzenko did not have direct access to this case. Guzenko learned about it apparently 3 or 4 years earlier through Lubomov. So it's Lubomov who's giving this information to Guzenko. So there's a filter there, and what he's doing is he is in effect trying to reconstruct a second-hand information. So what is this really? It is hearsay at this point. I'm not saying that he is being dishonest. No, I believe he's being perfectly honest and perfectly candid. But perfectly candid defectors give untruthful remarks, not intentionally. They give erroneous remarks because they want to tell you what they think in many cases you want to hear. They want to be helpful and add information that is often incorrect. So you need expert debriefers in order to make sure that you get in. You need the actual case agent interviewing this to follow up. The other thing I think that really sort of supports Pincher in this, and the possibility that there was a lot of weeding out in this particular case. I was in London for the rollout of Keith Jeffries' book, The Secret History of MI6, or the British Secret Intelligence Service. And I was writing my writing my second book at this time. Let me know when you give me this. Okay, great. I was writing my second book, so I was very keenly interested in the section of Jeffrey's book in the Second World War that dealt with British security coordination. I thought this was going to be the revelation. This was going to be, for me, the revelation about what was going on. And when I read the book, I was deflated, because essentially what was in the book was already what I knew from other sources. So I spoke to Jeffries about this, and afterwards, and he said, Ray, he said, I went back through the material, and there were absolutely 0 reports in MI6 files about British security coordination. Nothing. He said there were teletypes going back, but there were no reports, there were no analyses. And I said, what do you attribute that to? He said, well, I don't really know. Essentially, I think what happened was it was weeded out. So you wonder if the files are actually there. And I sort of close with the fact that, number one, I believe, as I'm sure I'm repeating myself, but I really believe that there has to be a case study done. But and I also think that it should be done by a professional historian with some intelligence, counterintelligence background, and go back and literally dissect this entire case, do a biography of Roger Hollis. We may not come to a conclusion, but I think what it's going to do, it's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's going to separate the myth from the fact. Because as we all know in history and even in counterintelligence work, very often there is an inference, and if you draw it out down the line, it becomes a fact. Okay? So I think in my estimation, those are probably 3 points I would make. If I had another hour, I'd go into a lot more in terms of this particular issue. But I will just indicate that at this particular point, I still remain very, very skeptical. I don't come down on either side, but I think there's a case to be made for a much more thorough, clinical, forensic, scholarly study of the Roger Hollis case. Okay, great, thank you.